afternoon. It's good to see you all. Lots of familiar faces. Glad to see you here today. I'm Elizabeth Farnsworth. I'm a trustee of the World Affairs Council and special correspondent for the PBS NewsHour. We're all watching as the upheaval in North Africa and the Middle East provides unforgettable images that inspire and at times make us despair. Events there are transforming our world, and we see only dimly what may lie ahead. After uprisings in Tunisia and Egypt, leaders around the world are rethinking policies and relationships in the region. As we meet today, the Libyan opposition has new hope because of the UN resolution yesterday authorizing military action to protect civilians. Saudi troops are backing up the royal family in Bahrain. Iran weighs its response. We're very lucky to have James Zogby and David Sanger as speakers to give us some perspective on these astounding events. During the remarks, I hope you'll pass your cards to council staff, and please make your questions very short and write clearly. I'll raise as many of your questions as time permits during a very brief Q&A after James Zogby and David Sanger speak. And please turn off your cell phones, by the way. James Zogby has been monitoring and measuring opinions in the Arab world for decades. He will help us understand what led to the protests across North Africa and the Middle East. Then David Sanger will take the stage to discuss the Obama administration's policy options given the new political landscape. James Zogby is founder and president of the Arab American Institute and a senior advisor at the polling firm Zogby International. He's the author of Arab Voices, What They Are Saying to the U.S. and Why It Matters, which I highly recommend, by the way. Please join me in welcoming James Zogby.
This wobbles, and I was thinking San Francisco earthquake. Thank you, Elizabeth. And her last advice about the book, highly recommended. Smart lady. Let me start by, the topic I was given is what Arabs think and why we should listen. And let me start with why we should listen. I put it this way. Since the end of Vietnam, we have sent more money, we've sent more weapons, we've sent more troops, we've fought more wars, we've lost more lives. We have more political and diplomatic interests and economic interests at risk in the Middle East than anywhere else in the world. And every president since Jimmy Carter has faced a crisis and a dramatic challenge in that region that has in some way shaped the success or failure of his administration. And with all those interests at stake, we don't know the Middle East and do not understand its people. I remember National Geographic did a survey about a month before we went into Iraq and found that 11% of Americans could find Iraq on a map. That survey was done again in 2009, and the number had jumped to 37%. We lost 4,000 lives in a country where only 37% of our people could find it on a map. 80% of Americans think that Arabs don't like us because they hate our values, but when we poll in the Arab world, 65% of Arabs say they like our values. 60% of Americans think that Iranians are Arabs, and almost as many think that Pakistanis are Arabs. And only about a third of Americans know the year that Israel fought its war of independence. Our educational system, frankly, has failed us. It does not inform us. And in fact, in an area of the world where so many issues are at risk, so many interests, rather, are at risk, we find ourselves sorely wanting for information. And if our educational system has failed us, our popular culture has distorted and created stereotypes that shape our thinking about the Arab world. And our political culture only reinforces and makes absolute those stereotypes and then exploits those stereotypes for political advantage. We end up seeing the Middle East either through those stereotypes or through imposed prisms that politicians will use to sort of create sense out of what we don't understand. So we never tired after 9/11 of sort of imposing the Cold War model on the Middle East. I mean, George Bush would describe Iran as somehow, you'd think about the Comintern, or the Caliphate being the sort of the Soviet empire, and this notion that it was all so easily understandable by imposing that model on it was something that many of us latched onto. Or when we went into Iraq, we saw it through the prism of Germany, of Japan, of going to liberate. When Iraqis said back, they saw us not as liberators coming in to Germany, but actually as Mongols coming in. We had no idea what they were talking about. And too often, we end up seeing it through the prism of Israel. Too many of our policymakers can only see the Middle East from Israel looking out. So there was a front page story in the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago about the Middle East conflict and what was going to be happening now after the revolutions in Tunisia and Egypt, how it was going to affect American policy. That was the headline, how the revolutions will affect American policy. Fully one half of the article was, what will it mean for Israel? Well, not to dismiss that, but frankly, when the guys were sitting in Tahrir Square, that wasn't the first thing on their mind, or maybe even second, third, or fourth thing on their mind. But we could not even grasp how to understand it without being riveted on that prism through which we almost see everything. And even liberal or enlightened commentators don't help. They engage too often in what I call bad science. Tom Friedman's, I met a guy in a bar, and he said this, and you know, Arabs are like that. It's sort of the black people run fast, I saw one, or Jews are this, or Hispanics are that. I mean, the notion, in other words, that you can take an observation, elevate it into a conclusion. Nicholas Kristof, who I have an enormous amount of respect for, did a piece just a couple weeks ago in which he started talking about his study of Arabic when he studied Arabic in school. And he said, you know, the Arabic lessons start with the past tense, and I never got past the past tense, and that's the problem with the Arabs, because they never got past the past tense. What the hell Arabic course did he take that started with the past tense? So it was not just an observation elevated into a conclusion, but it was a bad observation elevated into a bad conclusion. And that's why we poll. We poll because we need the data. And polling I call the respectful science. Because when we talk to 4,000 people from Morocco to Iraq, we listen to everything they say. We respect every point of view. There's no bad point of view. There's no wrong point of view. We organize the data. We organize it by country. We organize it by gender. We organize it by education. And we form a profile. And let me tell you about the first time we did and why we did it, because we were talking to Prince Khalid al-Turki al-Faisal in Saudi Arabia, the brother of Prince Turki. And he said, I want to find a way for Arabs to tell their story to the West. And we talked about it for a while. And then finally he stopped and he said, you know, but the problem is, what story will we tell? Whose story will we tell? I responded back to him that the issue is not about whose story, but it's about the authenticity of the storyteller, because there is no one story. Just like we Americans don't have one story, everyone has a personal story, and every culture and every ethnicity in our country has a story, but somehow they all form an American story. It's the same in the Arab world. And I said, the one way to do it is ask people. Ask them about their story. Ask them about their lives. Let's do something we've never done before and find out what Arabs think, what they believe, what their hopes are. And then let's see what the contours of the society are. And so we did. And when we did, we opened a window. And it was like 4,000 voices yelling in. And there wasn't a cacophony, because as we began to sort it out, some pictures began to emerge. The first thing we found was a vibrant and diverse people, each of whom had pride in their place and loved the country that they came from. Whether they were angry at their policies in their country, whether they didn't like what the governments were doing, they loved the place they were from. And they spoke in terms about Egypt and its unique history and characteristics, and the Lebanese felt the same, and the Saudis felt the same. They loved where they were from. And as different as each one was from the other, each culture from the other, there was a common language. And that created a common set of values emanating as they did from a shared history. And there was what I call a shared sensibility. Sort of like when we talk about voting here in America, there's no such thing as a Catholic vote. I mean, Catholics vote the same way that the public does as a whole. I mean, even on abortion, Catholics split the way the public as a whole does. But there's a Catholic sensibility. You can go into an Irish bar and say something about abortion and nobody's going to bother you, but if you say screw the Pope, somebody's going to get mad. Because you've tapped a nerve that comes from that sensibility. It's the same in the Arab world. Egyptians are different than Lebanese, and Moroccans are different from Saudis, but there's a common sensibility shared, and when you poll, you begin to discover what it is. It's not an angry culture either, which also intrigues me, because the myth we have in America, the notion that these guys go to bed at night hating America, wake up in the morning hating Israel, and spend the rest of the day in a mosque listening to an imam who hates them, makes them hate even more, or watching Al Jazeera, which even makes them hate double. That's actually not what happens. I would tell you a story. I was just in Saudi Arabia, actually, when the Tunisian thing was starting up, and at the same time that it was starting up, the Lebanese government was falling apart. And the conversation was hot and heavy. I was in a living room with about 18 people, and they were going back and forth between Jumblat and Hariri and whatever, and going on and on and on about it. And at one point in the conversation, a 28-year-old son of one of the folks came in, and he said, "It's on." And everybody immediately shifted in their seats, and he did the remote control. And the show that was on was called Arabs Got Talent, which is a little bit like American Idol, but it's gimmickier. It's sort of like David Letterman's dumb trick thing. And it was cute. It was a wonderful show. And as hot and heavy as the conversation had been about the stuff going on in Lebanon, it was that hot and heavy over who ought to win Arabs Got Talent. They are not angry. And when we poll, what we find is that they watch television like we do to be entertained. Number one rated shows are movies. After that come soap operas and dramas, and they love entertainment shows and game shows and reality shows. And way down the bottom of the list are preachers and religious programming. Church attendance rates in America compare favorably with mosque attendance rates in the Middle East. And when we ask Arabs what values they teach their children, it is rather striking, because they line up exactly with what Americans teach their children. It was interesting because we got the Arab results in first, and I looked at them and I said, oh no, creativity was down near the bottom. And then the American numbers came in, and creativity was down near the bottom. They actually don't hate us. They like us. They like the American people. They like our culture. They like our science and technology. They like so many things about us. One guy said to me, he said, you know, you are different than the Germans, Japanese, and Chinese. They export products, but you export a way of life, and we like it. We don't go to Starbucks because the coffee's better, but because we do an American thing, and we like it. He said, we don't dislike you, but we're convinced you don't like us because of the way you treat us. And it's the policies that ultimately make a difference. Let me now come to a cautionary note. I think when the president was elected, there was an enormous hope in the Arab world that there'd be change. It was stacked up against a kind of a jaded, I mean, these are folks who, it's like sort of being married to Hugh Hefner. I mean, you kind of know it's going to end and you just don't know when, but you don't have a whole lot of confidence that this is going to work. Talking about Arabs can actually be fun. I mean, I'm trying to help you out here a little bit, and the book is hilarious. My point is that as much as we got a sense of hope and optimism, we also got a sense that I'm not sure anybody makes a difference. I'm not sure it'll ever really get better. The speech in Cairo elevated expectations even higher. And the numbers that we're getting back now, we've plummeted back down to where we were before he even came into office. There is a sense that it didn't change and maybe even won't change. And part of the reason is that nothing really has changed, in the sense that the promises that were made about Guantanamo and about Israeli-Palestinian peace, et cetera, have not been delivered. And in fact, in the very week that we were celebrating the demise of the regime in Cairo, nothing was lost in the Arab world that very same week we vetoed the resolution on settlements, or that Peter King announced his hearings on Islamic radicalization, or that the Patriot Act and its controversial elements were renewed, and. And so now we come to a situation where we're watching a revolution take place in the Arab world, wondering what to do, and part of me says, no one there is waiting for us to sprinkle holy water on it. In Tahrir Square, there was not a sense that America will make this legitimate. And when I was asked by a reporter, will our standing go up in Egypt if we dump Mubarak, I said, you've got it upside down. We're not in trouble in Egypt because we supported Mubarak. He was in trouble in Egypt because he supported us. Because Egypt actually ended up becoming a way station on the road to rendition. Egypt supported Iraq, the war in Iraq. Egypt supported what Israel had done in Gaza and turned a blind eye, not just a blind eye, but actually sealed its border and accented the hardship of people in that part of Palestine. And so the issues in the Arab world are deep on America and need to be understood. This is not a turning point for America in the Middle East. In fact, if anything, it will create a situation where people in the Middle East, and the Arab world in particular, will feel freer to criticize America because it's the regimes who stood in the way of that criticism coming forward. And so there's that cautionary note that this does not change our relationship. New governments will come. If our policies don't change, the anger will remain as it is. And the alienation from America, in the sense that we aren't caring about what happens to them because we don't address the issues of central concern to them. There's one other issue I want to raise, and that is the fact that the transformation that is taking place here is the worrisome one to me. What began after 9/11 with a little bit of a spike in hate crimes, not a little bit, as someone who was victim of a number of them, it was quite frightening for the first month or so. George Bush put the fire out with a very strong message that Islam was not the enemy, that we should not strike out at Arabs, and in fact it became a measure of American patriotism to defend and protect people who were of Arab descent and people who were Muslim. But that's all changed. And we have had, since the Park 51 explosion last summer, an Islamophobic fest that has become quite worrisome and is watched as closely in the Middle East as we will watch when crazy imams will say crazy things in the region. And here's the problem. It's not just that it happened, but it has become locked in place as a part of the partisan divide. Listen to these numbers. Do you respect Arabs and Muslims? Democrats, 54% yes, 34% no. Republicans, 12% yes, 85% no. We always ask this question, do you know enough? After we've asked questions about the Arab world and Muslims, we say, do you know enough or do you need to know more? We used to get 75% of Americans saying, I don't know enough, I need to know more. Today, 73% of Democrats say, I don't know enough, I need to know more. 82% of Republicans now say, I know enough, I don't need to know more. Is Islam a religion that teaches hate? 69% of Democrats say no, 73% of Republicans say yes. The point is that this has become a partisan issue. And I thought maybe after the Park 51 election, the last one, that maybe we had like a one-note wonder, or that it was going to happen once and never come back again, sort of like the gay marriage election. And we've now found partisan consensus on that. And so it sort of disappears from the electoral landscape. I'm convinced we'll have another one in 2012. Our relationship will not fundamentally change with the Arab world if we continue to have this debate in America about, is Islam the enemy? And if Peter King keeps doing what he does, and if the presidential aspirants on the Republican side keep saying the things that they do and keep poisoning the well of the debate, we're in big trouble. Because we understand that when a crazy guy in Saudi Arabia says something and we have to then come back and criticize and say, this is the way Muslims talk about us and it ought to stop, they are hearing everything we say. And every part of our political discourse is understood and resonates back there in a way that only poisons the well of understanding. And as their revolutions begin to mount, and as the public becomes more empowered and sensitive to the ability they have to steer the discourse in their own country, they will not have a Mubarak who will snuff out the debate. They will not have rulers who will say, doesn't matter what they do, we need America, and therefore we will do what America needs us to do. Even the rulers who stay will be more sensitive to the public debate than they have been up till now. And the rulers that change will clearly be more sensitive to the public debate because that's what brought them into power in the first place. And so it does matter, and we ought to be listening more, and we ought to be paying attention not only to what Arabs think, but how we speak about Arabs and Muslims, and how what we say impacts the image of America and the relationship that America has with the Arab world, because at the end of the day, it is going to matter, and it's going to matter a lot. And I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, James Zogby. Now I'm pleased to introduce David Sanger. David is Chief Washington